up just your name and email address if you want to do that. And if you haven't grabbed handouts, Scott printed out the slides from tonight so you can bring those home with you or take notes on them right now.
Put them on the refrigerator.
Put them on the refrigerator, study them before you go to bed every night, whatever you want to do. There are t-shirts available back there, so if you haven't gotten a t-shirt that looks like those white ones or gray ones, or these beautiful fan club t-shirts, you should get one of these for all of your family members as well. Please take those tonight. And then the last thing is that on the tables I have little printouts of upcoming events that we have. So if you want to grab those. A few things to note is that we just started our swimming sessions in the mornings. So Tuesday, Thursday mornings at the North Y and at the Main Y we're meeting Tuesday and Friday mornings just for some informal swim groups, and then also on Sundays too. And then we have a swim taping, underwater swim taping coming up too. So if you're interested in that, just drop us an email and we'll save a spot for you.
All right. So before we get going, there were a couple handouts. There's one with the little printout of the lecture notes. There's also one with a kind of sample training plan, and then on the back it's a blank plan where you can write in what you actually want to do. The final thing, Dan brought a whole stack of these maps here for the Cheddarman 74.6 ride. Did you want to say something about that?
Yeah, people are looking for maps. There's a website on there that we're publishing a bunch of maps online so you can print them out to do training rides. That one's set up for people that are training for Ironman. It has a lot of rollers on it to get you ready for the ride. All these maps are also set up with a rest stop that's usually a convenience store every 25 to 35 miles. So they're designed to be self-supported. So there's also, there will be an organized ride doing that, I think July 14th. So if you go to that website, bicyclelacrosse.com, you'll see that and some of the other events. So if you're looking for cycling events, they're listed under that.
So then can you like download these onto your GPS thing, like if Mike wanted to do that? Or?
You will be able to by this summer.
Okay, cool. Great.
So yeah, if you have a GPS, we put GPS tracks up for that. Trying to get it so that you can actually do a one-button download to your Garmin, but everybody wants to charge you for that. So. So if you have other ideas for rides too, we keep coming up every year. We're trying to add more rides. Right now we've got about 11 different maps, and the maps will each have from 1 to 4 options on them.
All right. Well, this is our second triathlon seminar series. It didn't scare everybody off after the first one, so that's good. We got the brave hearts of that. So the one today is on training plans. I'm just going to make a pitch for the next one, which is on getting techie by Mike. He actually gave this in my triathlon class at UWL last week, and it was really good. He nailed it. So you got to come to that one if you want to learn how to get really fast on a bike. This is a good one, and it'll be at all levels, right? So from putting aero bars on to how to maximize your watt meter, whatever level you're at, you'll pick up some good tips with that. All right, I kind of hate to start class here because everybody seems to be having a good time drinking and talking. If I had this at the university, we'd never get anything done. The students would all be partying the whole time. All right, so we're going to talk about training plans today. And I just kind of broke down a couple of kind of little terms over here to think about when you're doing this. And again, you can use whatever words you want. Sorry about our sheet here, but you can probably read that. But the first thing you want to do is pick a goal. And this is actually really important. So usually you'll have some race you want to do. And not only then, I'd even go further than that, because that'll set your distances and things. But you also need to decide, is your goal here to PR? Is it just to finish? Do you want to win your age group? What goal are you setting for yourself? Because that'll actually change a little bit how you train for it. The next part, and that's what we'll talk about here today, would be how do you actually develop a plan. The next two parts, this is actually, I think, is the hardest for triathletes, is sticking to the plan. All right, and we'll see that they're sticking to the plan in two ways. You often think sticking to the plan in terms of skipping workouts, but actually what most triathletes I find do is they overdo it, right? So they have a plan and they run too far, too fast, and get themselves hurt. All right, so we're talking discipline has both levels. It's getting out and doing it, but it's also doing it at the right level and the right pace. And then finally race day, and then we'll have the last seminar we have is actually on some race strategy stuff. All right, so I like to think about triathlon training plans and kind of, this would be the minimal math, right? So this would be, if you're just a beginner, you just want to get started, this is kind of the baseline. You can always make things more complicated, right? But you should have it at least at this simple level here. So the first math is 1 + 1 is 2. So for each sport, you're going to do 2 workouts a week. One's going to be longer and easier, and again, long here depends on the distance you're doing and where you are in the training plan. But one's going to be fairly easy, endurance session, and the other's going to have some speed work built into it, right? So some kind of interval work. All right, and then you can probably figure out the next part. There's 3 sports in triathlon, right? So you're basically going to end up with 6 workouts a week, right? So for swim, bike, and run, you're going to have 1 endurance and 1 with some speed. And you can pair these up together. I think early in the season I do that a lot. Like I just started running again about 2 weeks ago, and I'm running, like 12 minutes or something like that. I mean, just really, I don't run as little as possible. So I would run and then I just go swim right afterwards, because it's almost not worth taking a shower after running for 12 minutes, right? So you can pair these up. You can pair up biking and running, swimming and running, right? Anything like that. So it doesn't mean you have to be out working out 6 days a week, but right, but you want at least, this would be the minimum, right? We can get that in. And in the training plan, I'll go over this a little bit later, but on the one sheet I've got there, you'll see we've got columns for speed work and easy work, for swim, bike, and run, and then I left a 3rd column for each of those if you want to toss in another workout. But this would be, again, just kind of real basic, simple start to a training plan. All right, when we talk about endurance work and speed work, it's not a 50-50 mix. All right? Even though we're saying 1 endurance workout a week and 1 interval workout a week, the optimum you want to shoot for in the week, and this will come back up a couple times, is about 80% of your time doing endurance work and about 20% of your time doing speed work. Right? And this, again, is a problem I see most common in people when they don't have a training plan. If they're just out running, they're almost always kind of running in the middle. Right? They're not going really hard, and they're not going really easy. They're kind of somewhere in the middle there. And they're really not gaining much endurance, and they're not gaining much speed. All right, so you want to mix things up a little. And even when you do your speed work, you're going to be doing a fair amount of endurance that day. Right, so let's say I'm going to do some intervals. I'd still probably do a 10 or 15 minute warm-up. I do my intervals. I'd probably be doing some slow stuff in between, and then I do a cool down. Right, so even on an interval day, I'm still going to be doing a fair amount of slow work. Right, and again, you're going to be building different types of muscles and using different fuel sources when you work out at these different speeds. And for those of you who suffered through the first seminar, this looks familiar. For those of you who didn't, I'll break it down again for you. So what we're looking at here is what type of fuel you're using at different speeds, different heart rates. Right? So on the x-axis, the bottom axis down here, we have a % of your maximum heart rate. All right, so everybody's got a maximum. This is as fast as you can go. A good rule of thumb, you'll find different formulas out there, but a pretty simple one is 220 minus your age. That's kind of your maximum heart rate. So for me, I'm getting close to 50, so my max would be about 170. Right, would be my maximum heart rate. I actually know it's a little higher than that because I've gotten up about that, but that'd be a good ballpark to shoot for. And then you can just multiply, this would be 90% of that, 80, 70, 60, 50. And those set your training zones. And again, these will vary for different people, but if you're new to this, these are pretty good ballpark to start with. On the y-axis over here, we have what we call a respiratory quotient. And a quotient is just a ratio. You divide one thing by another. And what we're dividing here is how much oxygen you're using versus how much carbon dioxide you're giving off. Right? And you can't actually measure that right now, but they can measure this on athletes. They put a mask on them, have them start running on a treadmill. They measure their heart rate, and they can measure the amount of oxygen they're taking in and the amount of carbon dioxide they're giving off. And you can figure out what fuel you're using. Right? So if you're using sugar, your respiratory quotient's 1. Right? For every oxygen you take in, you give off a carbon dioxide. Right? You're burning pure sugar at that point. Fat takes more oxygen to burn the same number of carbon atoms of fat, the sugar. And so if the more fat you're burning, this value is going to be higher. Right? And you can actually measure this on somebody while they're working out. Right? And what you find is that if you're working really slow and nice and easy, your body's going to try to burn fat. You have a lot of calories stored in fat. Like even a very lean person will have 10 times as many calories in fat as they will in carbohydrates in their body. Right? So you have a huge fuel supply there. And your body's going to try to save those carbohydrates. It's going to burn the fat if you're going slow enough, if it can get enough oxygen. right? As it starts working out harder and harder, and you don't have as much oxygen, you start switching over to sugar, right? You start burning your carbohydrates, and that's why this curve slopes down. At some point, depending on your conditioning, you're going to hit your lactate threshold, and this is where you can go for a while past that point, but eventually it's going to catch up with you. You're going to feel sore and crampy the next day. And finally, down here we're actually gone anaerobic. We're below 1, so we're actually like starting to, our muscles are starting to run out of oxygen. With training, what you can do, we showed this in the last seminar, you can actually shift this curve over to the right. So you can get yourself burning fat at higher outputs, and you can conserve those carbs a little longer, and your lactate threshold will move over too. So you can go harder at higher heart rates for a longer period of time without burning out. So that's part of what the training does. And so when we talk about training, you've probably heard, if you go on some of those exercise machines or something, they'll have your heart rates and they'll have the fat burning zone on the machine. Right? They're not actually making that up. This is your fat burning zone down here. Right? This is where it came from. Right? So if you can work out below, usually what most things you'll see will say below 70% of your maximum. If you can keep your heart rate below 70% of your maximum, you're going to burn more fat. Right? And what you're conditioning your body to do here is burn fat while you're moving, right? So again, you're tapping into a really good fuel supply. If you're trying to lose weight, this is also good, right? You're going to be down in this zone where you're going to be, you're trying to shed a couple pounds before you go into race season. Doing your training down here would be good as well. This zone up here in the yellow, we call zone 4, and this is where you're going to be affecting your lactate threshold. So the training you do here, this is where you're going to be working pretty hard, and this is going to start shifting this part of the curve over a bit. Right? So the more interval work you do, this is where your interval work is, so about 20% will be up here. This is going to start letting you go faster longer. Right? So you can sustain that longer. This is mostly your base endurance down here. This is in zone 1 and 2. There are 2 other zones I don't have shown here. This is zone 3, and we'll get into why we call this no man's land a little bit. This would be zone 5. You do workouts up here sometimes, but these are going to be really short bursts, like 30 seconds to a minute, so maybe 50s in the pool or something like that, or 30 runs outside, or 200-meter runs, something like that. These will start actually affecting your VO2 max, so the maximum amount of oxygen you can pump through your lungs. You can bump that up by working up in here. For triathletes, I would go here last, because you need to really have this built up pretty well, or you're going to start hurting yourself if you go right up to all-out sprints in the VO2 max zone. Right, so I would get this first, and then work on this, and then you could start working up here. Right, so I'm going to focus on these 2 primarily. If you're experienced, if you have like a year or 2 under your belt doing this stuff, you can start working up in this zone. Or if you're 18, nobody's 18. Okay, good. Those guys are indestructible. They can do anything. All right. So when we talk about training zones. Again, zone 1 and 2, this is as we just saw in that last curve, this is your low heart rate, your fat burning zone. To really see that shift in the respiratory quotient, you're working out here for about 18 months. All right, so this is a long-term thing. Now, I told this to a friend of mine once, who was a skier, and he'd been skiing for he'd done like 20 Berkeys or something like that. He said, 18 months, that's forever. He said, that's like next season, right? So you just get into your mindset that you're going to be training in this zone, and again, this can be really easy. This can be go to the Y and get on the elliptical and just spin along, watch the news for an hour. That's perfect. And if you can just do that 3-4 times a week, but keep it up for a long time, you're going to actually see a lot of benefit out of that. So this is long and it takes a little while, but once you get that shift, you've got a rock solid base. Right? You got an endurance base that, if you train this long, you can take about 3 months off and you lose half your endurance. Right? If you don't train like that and you take 3 months off, you'll probably lose all your endurance. Right? So this is a pretty solid base you have there. And again, this is going to be most of your training. And for me, like this time of year, when I can't ski because it's raining, I just got a trainer, my bike down in the basement. I'll just go down and watch the news for an hour and just spin nice and easy. I mean, that's really just doing zone 1, 2 training. We'll talk a little about cross training at the end. The zone 4 is where we're going to focus a little bit more, because this is pretty intuitive, right? I can just tell you, go out and go easy, and you're like, oh, cool, I can do that. Right? This is the part where we need to focus a little bit more on kind of some of the strategies and why you're doing what you're doing, and how to build it up really gradually so you don't get hurt. Right? I think that's actually the key part here. You don't want to injure yourself. You don't want to don't do zone 1 and 2 for a couple weeks and then say, okay, I'm going to go start running 800s at race pace, right, or something like that. That's when you're going to hurt yourself, right? So we're going to if you're not experienced with this, I still ease myself in this. I start out with 30-30s running, 25s in the pool at the beginning when I first start out. All right, so with speed work, again, the key here, we're trying to shift over your lactate threshold, or if you really get into the heavy-duty speed work, your VO2 max. This also does some fat burning, but it does it at a different time. It's actually an interesting thing they've discovered. This makes sense, right, while you're burning fat, that we can actually measure it. This one, you're not burning fat while you're working out, but you actually will burn it for about 6 or 8 hours afterwards. And the thinking is your body just ran away from a bear. You don't know if that bear is coming back, so it shifts over to fat and tries to save those sugars, so if the bear comes back, you still have a little something left. So you actually get some fat burning if you're trying to lose weight from this part as well. And again, this should be used sparingly. This is like your seasoning, right? You just put in a little bit of this just to spice things up. All right, I mentioned there's this zone 3 in the middle. And this is, I think, where a lot of people train. If they're not conscious about it, if they're just going out and running the same 5K loop every day, they're probably running in this zone. And some of the things that I think can be good about it, you feel like you're working hard, you're out there running, you're not quite going race pace, but you're getting your heart rate up, you're breathing hard, you come back, you worked up a good sweat, right? You know, all those types of things. And for some races, it might actually be good. It turns out for me, for Ironman, my running pace was an 8-minute mile, which is, for Ironman, which was right in the middle of no man's land for me. It's what I've been training not to run at for years. And that was actually what I had to go and learn how to run for that race. So sometimes it is a pace you actually want to go, especially for a longer endurance event. The downsides of it, especially if you're training for a sprint or Olympic triathlon, you're not really getting enough speed work in there to go faster. And where I noticed this when I was first started playing around learning about these zones, I go out and I train, and then I go to do a race, and I was training, 7-minute miles or whatever, and I'd race and I'd try to do 6-minute miles, and your body's going, hey, what the heck, you haven't run this hard since the last race. So what you have to do is get your body used to that. You have to acclimate yourself to going race pace or even a little bit faster, but you do it in short little doses. Also, if you're going this fast, you're really just burning carbs. You're not really burning any fats. You're not building much endurance. So you're not really going to run faster or longer if you train in zone 3. Again, sometimes it's the correct place, but I'd make an argument that you're better off going slower sometimes and faster other times than training in that range. All right, so I think I've said most of the stuff up here before. So for me, at least, and probably for most folks, like for running, this would be like pretty easy. So even if I race at 6 to 7-minute miles, this running would be 9 or 10-minute miles, maybe 12. I don't know how many of you know Ralph Heath. He's a biker that started doing this years ago. And he had a coach, and I talked to him, and his coach basically had a heart rate monitor on. He had to keep it under 70%. He couldn't run and keep it under 70%. He said like the first 6 months he had to walk, basically, until he got his endurance up to where he could run at that pace. So sometimes you have to walk, right? You just go as slow as you have to until your body's ready that has the endurance to go at that speed. I think on the bike, an easy way to force yourself to go easy is just keep it in the little ring in the front and spin. It's like a governor on a car. You can only go so fast if you're spinning around like that. On the swim, I would just focus on a real long glide, just get a nice, easy, rhythmic stroke going. And you're not worried about how fast you're going on these, right? You're just going to go out and just cruise along, stare at the bottom of the pool or the lake or whatever. Okay. So these should be nice and easy, right? If you're on a bike or running, you should be able to talk, really carry on a conversation. The speed work, if you want to be like this stud here, sorry, Mike. Then you want to be doing about 20% of your training here. And again, the goal here is we're going to shift our lactate threshold up. We want to get our body used to going hard, right? And we're conditioning it to that, to where when you go to a race and you say, okay, I want to do a 7-minute pace, your body's like, yeah, no problem. I did this last week, right? I do this all the time. All right, so this is going to be race pace or faster, right? And actually with some of the intervals, it could be quite a bit faster than what your target race pace is. So one of the goals here, one of the things that's probably going through your head is, well, what's my race pace? And this, again, is something you'll need to figure out. So if you've done a 5K run, and you know about how fast you race there, that'd be a good place to start, right? That would be your pace per. Or I'll show you when you start doing some of your intervals, if you could pick a pace, and if by the end of the set you can't hold that pace anymore, that's not your pace, right? You need to go a little bit slower, right? If you're getting slower after each rep, that means you aim too high or too low, I guess. You need to raise your time a little bit. The other thing with intervals is you have a little recovery in between. So the idea here is we're working out your heart, that you're getting your cardiovascular going without burning out your legs. All right, so we're going to go hard for 30 seconds, and we're going to go easy for 30 seconds. And that 30 seconds is not enough recovery where your heart rate's going to get back down much. Right, you're going to go hard for 30, easy for 30. So your heart rate's staying up, but you're only putting about half the work on your legs as if you'd run hard the whole time. Right. And these, again, depending on the race, could be anywhere 30 seconds to 15 minutes. I've kind of come to the conclusion that the maximum you would make these is about 10% of your race distance. In fact, I was just talking to the Bemidji High School ski coach this weekend when I was up there doing a race, and we were skiing afterwards. I told him about my theory here, that it's about 10%, and he said, well, actually, you know, his kids, they do 5K races, and their key interval's half a kilometer. You talk to the coach for the cross-country team at UWL, they do a 10K race, their optimal interval is a 1K. So it's pretty universal across different sports. So if you don't know how long your longest should be, that's a pretty good rule of thumb, right, for intervals. Now, you might do multiple of those, right, but you don't need to go more than about 10% of whatever you're racing. There's another type of speed work we call a tempo, and this is going to be a little bit slower than your race pace, right, but you're going to hold it longer, right, and this is starting to kind of get a mix of endurance and speed. I would tend to throw these in a little bit later in the training season. I kind of build up the intervals first, get your body used to going fast and long individually, and then the tempo you're starting to kind of put them together. Like how long can you hold that? And this is again getting closer to a race type condition, so you don't want to do this too much like right before a race or something. You could kind of impede yourself a little. All right, so before we go on, any questions on what we're talking about with speed work and endurance work?
When should you start doing tempo work? Like how far?
Yep. Yeah. So I'll show you on our training plan there. But I would actually work that in and actually, very good. So when we do training plans, we do something called periodization. So I'm going to use a term here. So I would probably start doing the tempos about maybe into your third or fourth cycle in a periodization plan. And then the first couple rounds are going to just be building up your speed, so you can. I like to ease into this stuff, and I'm pretty conservative on speed work because I think that's where a lot of injuries come from. People trying to go too hard, too fast, and they don't have the base yet. Again, the younger you are, the more you can tolerate that. As you get older, you try to protect your knees and hips and anything else that moves. You have to be a little more careful with that. But yeah, that's a good question. Okay, so the other thing that's different, probably at least from what I learned to run back in high school, back then it was, you add 10% a week or whatever until, you're running some astronomical distance. So that's, the exponential growth model doesn't necessarily work so well. Most training plans you'll see now involve something called periodization. So we think of this as kind of like steps, and each of these periods we typically think of as a week. So this would be 1 week, 2, 3, 4, 5. This is actually a pretty long periodization plan. And so each week here you're building a little bit, right? You're going to build usually in both the intervals and in the endurance part, right? So you're going to be adding and adding and adding and adding. And then the key here is this recovery week. In this recovery week here you're going to drop back down, usually a week or two in the plan, and then build back up, and you drop back down and build back up. So it's a long, gradual build. But the key here is that these recovery weeks are really where you get the benefit from all that training you did in the previous ones. Because what you're doing here is you're stressing your body out, right? You're stressing, and your body's trying to adapt to it, but it's probably putting most of the energy into immediate needs like running, because for all it knows there's a bear after you, right? And so it's your mind's telling your body to run, it's saying run, Well, when you do these breaks, this is when it actually builds muscle, right? It can take that energy you're eating and use it to build up your muscles so that when you go out and do it again, you're ready to, you're getting the maximum benefit out of that periodization. And again, to me, this would be kind of long. I usually do about 4 cycles. I was just talking to Ron, and he's doing one where he basically do 2 in a recovery, 2 in a recovery. All right, so you can kind of play around with some of these things, how many steps you do. There's no one way to do these things. I like to do it 4 just because it makes my life easy, because that's a month, right? So I go 1 week, 2 weeks, then the beginning of the month I drop back down, go back up, drop back down. So that just, again, I'm kind of simplistic on these things. But whatever works for you, or if you have a key race here, you might want to do it so you have a build and then a 2-week taper. Like if you're doing an Ironman or something, you might work backwards from the Ironman and set your training plan up that way, right, in terms of where your builds are going to be. Okay. So when we're talking about the build, it's easy to think about the build in terms of endurance, right? If you're running, 2 miles one week, you run a mile, 3 miles the next, 4 the next, 5 the next, right? The endurance part's pretty easy. The trickier part, I think, is starting to think about how you work periodization in with the intervals. So that's what I'm going to focus on here. And there are different ways to do intervals. The classic way you'll see, like for track runners or swimmers, is you do your interval and then you stop, right? Like the guys that do their interval in the pool, and they'll just stop at the end and wait 15 seconds, and then they'll do the next one. Or runners, they might do it and then they stop and stretch a little and then they run again. What I like is a slightly different model. I think it's actually good for endurance athletes. They call it a fartlek, which is Norwegian for fast leg. So fart actually means fast in Norwegian. If somebody calls you a fart, they're actually complimenting you. And lek is leg. So fartlek means you have a fast leg and then a slow leg. So you never stop moving, right? And we also call it active recovery. And I actually like active recovery for 2 reasons. One is I think it keeps the blood flow moving and everything like that, so I think you actually do recover a little bit faster, right, as opposed to just stopping and all your muscles get all tight. The other thing is I think 3 things now. I just thought of another one. I think it actually helps you get used to this kind of stuff for training or for races. If you're in a race and you climb a hill and you're tired, you don't want to just stop, right? You want to keep moving. So it teaches you to recover while you're moving. It teaches you to get your heart rate back down, but not stop moving. And the third thing is it's a chance to kind of work on your technique a little bit, right? I think especially for swimming, I like to do a hard lap or whatever my hard laps are, and then do a drill, like a fist drill or fingertip drag or something like that. And that gets you alternating, going hard and fast, and having good form. And eventually they're going to mix together, right? You're going to be able to maintain good form while you're going fast. The other thing is you want to keep those recoveries pretty short. And a good rule of thumb there that you typically see is the recoveries are shorter than the interval, or no longer than the interval, we'll say that. So if you go hard for 3 minutes, you might go easy for 3 minutes, but you wouldn't go easy for 10 minutes, right? And the goal here, again, is we're kind of keeping our heart rate up a little bit. I guess I already said these. You can work on your technique and form and recover while you're still moving, right? The hardest part with intervals is knowing what your pace should be and then having the discipline to stick to it, right? So some of this, you might just have to kind of do trial and error, and I'll show you in a second how you can do some of that. Or if you've done races before and you have a goal, like you know what your PR was last year, or your PR was, and you want to beat that, right? You know what swim time you want to shoot for, what run time, what bike time. You can start putting some race paces in there and start training around those race paces. One of the tricks here then is trying to hit that pace, right? And the goal, one thing that you'll see often is people go too hard, right? They're getting out there, they're feeling great, and they just start really cranking their speed. And that might work for a little while, but eventually it catches up with you. Either as the number of intervals get longer, you stop hitting that pace, or your body just says, I can't go that fast. Right? The other thing I've noticed too is some people leave their best race out on the training field, right? They get on a group ride and everyone's feeling frisky and they just go too hard and pop a quad. Or in the pool, you're just hammering away. So again, what you really want here is discipline. What you really want to be able to do is get out there and you're conditioning your body so that when you go and start the run, let's say you get off the bike and start running, you don't start streaming down the trail at 5:30 mile when your target was 6:30, right? That's going to catch up with you, right? So you want your body to know when I start running, this is what my race pace feels like. So you just slip right into that. It's kind of like autopilot for you. All right, so if I was going to do periodization with intervals, this is an example of what it might look like. Right, so this could be running or swimming, and so let's say it's swimming. So I'm doing 200s here, so that would be 200-meter interval, and then I do 100 easy, and then I do a 200 hard, 100 easy, 200 hard. Right, and that might, again, I'm building up real gradually here. That might be 1 week, and the next week what I'm doing is I'm just adding a set to that. Right, and then the week after that I'm adding another one, and the week after that I'm adding another one. Right, and this is simplistic, right? You might be doing 6, 8, 10, 12, right? But you get the idea. You gradually are adding a little bit each week. And if you start out swimming these guys too fast, by the time you get here, you're not going to be able to hold your pace anymore. If this was your target race pace, and you can't hold it, with recovery in between, there's no way you're going to hold that in a race, right? So you're aiming too hard for your race pace. This is a good way to check really quickly if you're overestimating you need to readjust your goals. Does that make sense? Right, so ideally, each set you should be able to hit these right on the money, within a couple seconds of each other. And if you find that each one's getting slower and slower and slower, you need to kind of readjust your sights a little bit. All right, then at the end of a periodization, again, we're going to shorten this down, right? This is my recovery week. And you got a couple of options here. You can either, if you like, if you're in love with 200s, you could just go back up to here and, you know, then build your next one up higher. Or you could start making your intervals a little bit longer, right? So can you still hold that same pace for a longer distance, right? And you can now start building up on 400s, do that for a couple weeks, right? So with the intervals, again, you're kind of just gradually building, adding a set, or adding a little bit to each set each week. Okay. Come on. All right. The final thing with periodization is rest, all right? And again, this is, I think you can't overemphasize this. They're finding more and more now with athletes to really get peak performance. Resting's important. Now, for professional athletes, they'll go out and do their hard workout and they'll just get a massage and put their feet up and sit around the rest of the day. All right, for those of us who have lives, right, we're not going to do that. But then I think rest is actually even more important, right? You need to take into account that when you do your workouts, that's one part of your life. It's 5–10% of your life, right? You might be on your feet all the rest of the day. That's a whole bunch of zone 1–2 training, right? So you might not need to do maybe as much endurance work, or take that into account. You know, I've been running around all week. So here you want to take at least 1 day off a week, sometimes 2. And then you have these recovery weeks, and I said 4 to 5 here. This could be 2 to 5 weeks, right, depending on your periodization cycle. I think cross-training is really good to work different muscle groups, so you're not, especially runners, I think, who just go out there and run, you know, 9 days a week. Eventually they start just blowing out every joint in their body. I think cross-training is really good that way, right? Mix up, use different muscles. Again, triathletes don't have that problem as much. I think the final thing I'd say about training plans is you made this thing, right? Or you found it off the web, hopefully you tweaked it, or a coach gave it to you. If it's not working for you, change it. Right? You don't feel like you've got to stick to this thing come hell or high water, right? It's just written on paper. You can take an eraser out and rewrite it pretty easily. So if you're feeling like it's not working for you, feel like you can go back and change it. All right. So next thing I talk about in training are just a little bit about the 3 sports, a little bit on just kind of technique, and also what kinds of workouts you can do to get yourself ready for racing. And Mike's going to talk a lot more about kind of the technology side to things later. So I'm going to focus more on a little bit on the technique part. And I was thinking about it, I can think of kind of 3 ways, 3 styles of swimming that you might see. So one is kind of the real muscle-bound approach to swimming, which is basically just get your arms out there and move as much water by your body as you can, as fast as you can. And that actually works fine if you've got the other 2 working for you. But some people start out there, right? So they're making a lot of bubbles, there are lots of kicking going on, but they're not necessarily going all that fast. They tend to have a really high turnover. The other would be more of a mechanical approach, and I think this is now getting a little bit more looking at your form. So here you're trying to think about maximizing the amount of water you have in contact with your body. So you want to think of your arm like a paddle as it goes through the water. You want to think of the body roll, which again, just my body rolling like this is moving my arm through the water. So I'm using my core to swim instead of all my tiny little arm muscles. So you can start thinking about it more of a mechanical perspective. Right, here you're paying attention a lot to your body position and how it's moving through the water. The other way, and I think this is actually a kind of a nice way to think about it as well, is don't worry about how fast you're going. Don't worry about your technique and think about mechanics. Just try to think about getting out there and reaching as long as you can on the glide, really feeling where the water's hitting your body. Have contact points, like your hand should be brushing your hip, your toes should be clicking, which means your feet are together, you're not kicking out like this, right? You're in together, nice and tight. I like to just feel like you're dragging your fingertips across the surface of the water all the time. That keeps your elbows nice and high. And you can just do that, just nice, relaxed swim. I think actually the really good swimmers do all 3 of those at the same time. Right? They've got a good feel for the water, they got good mechanics, and then when they need to go fast, they get that high turnover going, and those are the folks that are just going to zip through the water. So I think all 3 have their place. I think a lot of people start here, and it takes a while these parts take a little bit longer. And we're going to have some swim video sessions if you've never been videotaped underwater swimming. Not everybody looks like her. She's got really good form. But it actually is very informative, right? It's really hard to know what you're doing in the water because you can't really see yourself. There's no mirrors to look at or anything like that. So I think it is pretty helpful. So some key workouts to swimming. I think any swim workout you do should have drills in it. And these are technique drills, so I just keep reinforcing that. These are some things I learned from students who are really good swimmers. They like this warm-up thing called skip, and you can do 2 to 4 laps of each, so just like front crawl swim, a couple laps of kick. Backstroke and breaststroke I think are really good for triathletes because you work the opposing muscles, right, that you would doing the crawl. Right, anytime you know weightlifting, you're always supposed to, if you lift one thing, you're supposed to kind of go the other way, just to keep those worked out. And then pole buoy, that's where you just put that little float between your legs and just work on your arms. And you can get a nice body roll doing that. So you do a couple laps of that. That could be like 10, 20 laps right there, just warm up. You haven't even done a workout yet, but this is really important for swimming, is just to get that good feel for the water. Intervals, you'll find swimmers, they always come with these printouts with, we're going to do 15 150s by 30, it's like, this just makes me happy. All right. What I just like to keep it simple.
Thanks, Francis.
Yeah. He's not the only one, believe me. I've seen lots of. If you have to go to a workout with something printed off, then.
I just write it up.
Yeah.
It's not printed.
So I really like 50s to I like 50s to 100s for Sprint Olympics. I think 200s to 400s. Actually, I really did a lot of 200s last year for IM. I think that's a good distance for that. So those would be again your pretty short, fast workouts. Again, what I like to do is just to never stop. So you do 200, which would be 4 laps, down and back, and then I would just throw in a lap of like a one-arm drill, right? So you're just swimming, or like just one arm going down, one arm coming back, or a fist drill. Catch-ups where you're having one hand and then the other, that really gets you a nice long glide, fingertip drags. But you basically do a hard set and then you do a drill, and a hard set and a drill. And eventually, I think that drilling will kind of start become part of your actual swimming. All right, so those are some good, just kind of key workouts for swimming. Another thing to think about though is then we're not going to be doing the race in the pool. All right, you're going to be doing the race out in open water. And I used to whitewater kayak a lot, and we'd actually do what we call pool sessions, where you go and you learn how to do an Eskimo roll in the pool. So you can start out on the edge of the pool, and eventually get to where you could do it out in the water. And you get folks that could just flip around in the pool all over the place. The trick was when you got out onto whitewater, and you flip over, and the current's trying to pull the paddle out of your hands, and it's sensory overload, you're bouncing off rocks, you still have to be able to set up and roll. All right? And then we used to call this a bomb-proof combat roll. So bomb-proof meant you never missed. In combat, it didn't matter what was bouncing off your head. You could focus enough to get it done. And what this takes is both, just mentally, you need to be able to shut everything else off and focus on what you need to get done. And you have to have the muscle memory that once you get set up, it's just going to happen automatically. Right? So I think what we need to develop as an open water swimmer is a bomb-proof combat swim. All right, and this could be, yes, those of you who've done Ironman know this is an Ironman swim start, so this is about as bomb-proof combat as you're going to get. But even just, this was High Cliff a couple of years ago, and we had good 2-foot swells. There was a west wind blowing right across the lake, and we had some swimmers that dropped out just because of the swim, right? They took some water in. So I think one of the things you need to practice here is the swimming's not going to be nice in the pool with straight lanes and you get to do your laps, right? You need to go out and throw yourself into some tough conditions. I think swim on a wavy day. If you can find a good east wind at Lake Neshonoc, go out and swim in it, or if you're by Lake Michigan sometime, wait and swim in the afternoon when you got 2-foot swells and just get out and get used to it. I don't know any other way to get around it other than just to practice those things. Some things you can do in the pool. You can practice alternate side breathing, so make sure you can breathe off both sides. I think that helps a lot, so that if you are this person here getting clobbered by that person, you can start breathing on this side, right, and not breathe in their armpit. Right? Okay. All right, with biking, and again, Mike will talk, he does a nice job on this, he'll talk about this at the next session. In biking, you're trying to get a balance here between being as aero as possible. So Josh here's got a really nice aero position. It might take you a little while to get into that position. I mean, like over time, you're just going to have to kind of ease yourself down into it. Because as you get more aero, you're going to start losing some power. Right? So you're going to be more aerodynamic, but as you get down lower, you're not going to be able to generate quite as much force on the pedals. And also, flexibility becomes an issue. So you could ride like in this position all day, but you're not doing a bike race, right? You're doing a triathlon, so you got to be able to get off and straighten your back out again and run, right? So if you don't have the flexibility to hold this position and run, then that's not going to work for you either, right? So with biking, again, this still ties in with, to me, with training. You need to get yourself used to riding in these positions, and you need to kind of find out where you can ride, right? You need to find out what's the most aero position you can get into. If you have a power meter, you can see where you're generating power there. Can you get off the bike, so do some brick workouts? Can you get off the bike and actually run after riding in this position for an hour or two? Right? And again, this is, you're going to gain a lot of speed by finding this balance. And everyone's balance is going to be different, right? I couldn't just throw you on Josh's bike, right? And actually Mike bought Josh's bike. Could you just ride it the way he had it set, or did you have to adjust it?
I had to adjust it.
Right, yeah. So you're not going to jump on someone else's bike that they've tweaked down and be able to ride on it and get a good performance, right? It's all gonna, you're gonna have to tailor this a little bit. So for biking, some workouts I like, just little 3 to 5 minute intervals. So again, this would be kind of a fartlek workout. So you'd be out there, you'd just be riding along, and I just do it by my watch. You just look, or if you got a bike computer with a timer on it, you just look and say, okay, 3 minutes, you know, hard, 2 minutes easy, 3 minutes hard, right? You just start getting yourself used to some intervals. For Ironman, I was getting up to about 15-minute intervals, right? So that would be a bit longer, 4 to 5 miles, something like 5, 6, I don't know, somewhere in there. But just good hard crank, and then you go 5 minutes easy, get up to 15 hard, and you can just throw in a whole bunch of sets of those, right? You just get your body used to going hard and take a break, go hard and take a break. Right? Hills are good, especially if you're going to race in Wisconsin. We tend to have hills, and there's kind of a term, people say this is speed work in disguise, right? So if you get out there and do hills, you're gonna have to push a little harder to get to the top often, unless you got a real granny gear, but even then you're probably still going to be pushing a little harder. Another thing for triathletes is we often want to try to maintain a pretty high cadence, and again, Mike will go into this more a little later, but that means you want to be spinning pretty fast so that you're not really cranking down hard, because that's when you start burning your quads out, and when you go to run, they're not going to be happy with you. Right, and a trick there would be just to ride, keep it in the small ring in the front. When I did Ironman Wisconsin, I'm guessing I probably did about a quarter of the race in my little ring in the front, because there's so many hills there. I'm just getting a little gear and spin, and you'll still get to the top just about as fast as somebody sitting there going like this, right? And you're saving your legs for the run afterwards. So don't be afraid to use the small ring. I think sometimes people get this thing that I've got to be in the big ring and cranking as hard as I can, right? Really, you've got to remember what you're doing after this, right? So if you start feeling it in your legs, back off. All right, with running, again, I think form is still very important, and I'm not saying I've got the best form in the world. I'll just embarrass myself here with the picture. That'll be funny. All right, so the key with running here is you want to be leaning forward at the ankles, and the idea is as you go forward, your foot's just naturally going to fall underneath you, right, just by reflex. Right, if I just lean forward, it's going to land, and it's going to land on a pretty flat foot. Right, so my heel's not landing out in front of me. When I was in high school, they taught us to run with high knees and really get your legs out, nice long strides. I figured that made you go faster. But what you're doing each time, if this is my ankle here, or I'm sorry, my heel, each time I'm sticking my leg out there, if that's the ground, I'm just banging my heel into the ground, right? And eventually you get shin splints and knee problems and hip problems and every problem we have. Right, if you can keep your hips forward like a ski jumper, right, and you're landing with your foot flat, you're not doing that braking action on each run. And really, your stride should be kicking out the back. Right? So I'm not lengthening my stride in the front, I'm lengthening the kick out the back. That's where your propulsion's coming from. So you should have a nice long kick in the back, but landing on a pretty flat foot in the front, hips leaning forward a little bit, chin down, so that'll actually also keep you leaning forward a bit. A lot of times you'll see people, especially when they start going faster, head comes back. Right? And what that does is it throws your weight back, and it throws you're starting to land on your heels. Right? So if you're starting to feel tired, often you're probably looking right about here anyway if you're tired, right? But if you're starting to feel tired, get your chin down, really lean into it, and gravity will just kind of push you along, all right? At least in theory. All right, if you want to go faster, basically your accelerator is just lean forward more. Right? I was doing this in a class a couple of years ago with some of my students. This big guy came up afterwards, we're doing gait analysis, and he's like, you know, I'm always getting really bad shin splints when I run. So I ran a couple laps with him, and I said, okay, just start, you know, pushing forward on your hips more. And he started going. He's like, wow, man, it's like I'm floating, you know. And it's like a 200-pound guy can float going around the track. I mean, about anybody can, right? So I think that's really the key. Now, that's something you just have to play with. I mean, you just have to go out and find out what works for you. But think of your hips as your throttle, right? That's going to make you, the more you go forward, the faster you're going to go. All right. Running, to me, is where people probably get the most, I think, get the most injuries. right? If you have a good bike fit and you spin, there's no impact, you're probably going to be all right. Swimming, you might have some shoulder problems, but as long as you warm up, you're probably all right. Running is where I usually find people just get out, and it might be they just run so much or a bad form, but I think this is where you usually get the shin splints, the knee problems, the hip problems. I think you need to just really gradually build your endurance. Once you feel like you've got a pretty good amount of endurance going, you can start adding in speed work. And I like to add the speed work fairly early, but again, early is going to depend on the person. Like if you're coming off the couch, right, and you haven't been running in a long time, you might want to get in a good month of just easy running before you start doing any speed work. If you've been running for a while, I think a lot of people wait until like a month before the race and then they start doing their intervals. And I think they start doing too much too fast. Right? Really, if you're trying to get your body used to going race pace, you can do it in really small amounts. And I'll show you some runs that I like to do there. Again, the key here would be stick at your race pace. Some intervals I like for sprints, probably 400s to 800s. I think 800s are a really nice distance for Olympic. For half Ironman and Ironman, I do a lot of miles, right? Because that's kind of 10% of your race, more or less. There's another workout that we do. Most of you probably know this already, called a brick. There's some debate on where the name brick comes from. Some people think it's someone's name. Others say it's what your legs feel like after you get off the bike. Whichever it is, we call them bricks. So it's basically biking and then running, right? And the key, I think, to a good brick, and again, this could be any distance biking. I threw in 20. You could do a 10-mile bike. But you want to get a couple little sprints in there. You want to get a little bit of burn going in your legs, right, to simulate like you're getting off the bike on a race, right? And then you're going to run your first 10 minutes of the run at race pace. So a brick is something we wouldn't toss into a little bit later in the training, more like you'd be doing a tempo run. It turns out it's not necessarily hard to get off the bike and run. It's hard to get off the bike and run fast. Right? And that's what you're trying to simulate. You're trying to simulate getting off and running at your race pace. The other thing I think that this is really good about this, that this does, is it trains you that when you're in a race and you get off and you start running, you don't go out too fast. Right? Which is the most common thing people do. They get off the bike and they see all these other folks running and they're like, I did that at the first Ironman. I look down at my watch and I'm doing like under 7-minute miles. I'm like, whoa, no, that's not. I'm supposed to be doing 8. But you just see all these people going and you just start running too fast, right? So this really conditions you to learn what your target pace is and know the feel of it. So when you get off the bike, you can do it.